Growing weary of running from room to room, practicing one-tooth insurance-driven dentistry? Then stay tuned for the latest episode of The Lionhearted, where Dr. Stephen Rasner will hand you the blueprint for what many call the gold standard of general practice dentistry.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of The Lionhearted. I'm Dr. Steve Rasner, and I would encourage you to reach out to me to my email at drrasner, drrasner at AOL. If you have any questions, want anything that I speak about on the podcast, or if you want specific topics you'd like me to address based on my own thinking, what I would do about a certain situation, I would love it if some of you wrote to me and said, hey, how about a podcast on blank? So in the last podcast, I was talking about the nucleus of your dental practice, and I asked you to imagine in your mind the image of a hurricane, like spinning, and naturally in a positive way. And that was what you were after building, certainly in the early years, and maintaining in later years of your practice. And I want to expound on that today and some of the specific things that will make that hurricane nucleus grow. And they're very, very particular what you have to, some of it even might be controversial. So let me touch base, those of you might have skipped a couple episodes, of why I talk about the importance of having your practice nucleus base be as big as possible. And here's the reason why. So as you go in through practice, you're going to hit highs and lows as to the number of people that accept your case, your treatment recommendations. It's just going to happen to you. It doesn't matter sometimes if you gave the presentation of your life. It doesn't matter if you were stone cold honest. For example, let's say a tooth broke off at the gingival margin. It doesn't have a favorable root structure. It's clearly a tooth that's going to need removal and would be best replaced with an implant. That's happened to me, by the way, the story I'm about to tell you, and the patient leaves you for another opinion. The patient I'm talking about came faithfully to me with his family for 20 years. It was the front right central incisor, and he broke it to the gum. Did not have favorable root structure, so I couldn't extrude it orthodontically and gain the appropriate tooth structure, or ferrule as we speak of, to even recrown it anyway. And he wanted no part of that. And guess what? He found somebody. I unfortunately didn't get to see him again, but he found somebody somewhere that put that crown back in with glue or pins and a wire. And sure, you could have done that. But we'll talk later in this program exactly about that. Where do you draw that line? Where do you draw that wire? Line, as to, well, you know what? Okay, I'll do this time. But eventually I want you to expect that you're going to need further treatment. And I say it like that to you because I don't want your practice to become a whole practice of rigged dentistry. 8 surface composites or amalgams, and later you'll get to the crown, or you'll treat the perio a little bit right now, maybe with one extra visit, but eventually they're going to have accepted therapy, quadrant scaling, root planing, etc. See, that's the point I'm getting to. But I don't want to get into that right this second, because those of you that missed the other episodes on enlarging that nucleus, the advantage of it is the larger that it is, the less you have to rely on new patients. And it almost becomes an automatic pilot situation where there's something always spinning off of the nucleus, in addition to new patients coming into your office and accepting treatment that you might have recommended. And then together, that creates, the steady line of work for you to do, and of course, income. The smaller the nucleus is, the less that'll happen. So I guess you could call the nucleus your practice base, whatever you want to call it. But it's an important factor of your long-term success for you to recognize that it's an important cornerstone that needs to be healthy. So in the beginning of your practice, whether you bought one or certainly if you started stone cold new, how do you get the nucleus to be larger? And see, I like a young dentist to look at his career in the first 5 years as if he was a recent medical student graduate. All of us are familiar with the med student graduates have to sometimes do those 80 to 100 hour residencies right after medical school where they work in a hospital and they're really learning all the ins and outs and all the nuances of good medicine sometimes in those early years, and they're really paying a great price for that in terms of hours and time. Well, you don't even have to come anything close to doing 100 hours or 80 hours. But they are the years, look, this has always been, this being the Lionhearted podcast, has always been just one man's opinion. It's mine. And I have a pretty good track record. I don't mind reminding you that I once had 29 consecutive years of increased growth and profitability. So if you had that happen starting today because you're listening to some of my advice, you would go to about the year 2049 and be doing better every year than you did the year before if you follow a lot of these principles. So back to my early years and your early years, you got to do whatever you got to do. If that means you work for not just yourself, but you work and I would hope that your partner, your significant other, would understand this and be on board with you. And that in the beginning, like I worked 3 jobs. I worked for my father, I worked for 2 other dentists, and I tried to start my own practice. So I actually had 4 jobs. Yeah, so I had my own practice with my father and worked 2 other jobs, and I tried to start another practice about 45 minutes away from me. So whatever it takes for you, let's say you're not doing that, but you have to work evenings in the beginning or Saturdays in the beginning, whatever you have to do to let your community know that you do exist. I mean, I don't know any other magical fairy dust that you can sprinkle over yourself and make that happen. It's called sacrifice. It's called the early years. It's whatever it is. And I did do that for many, many years. And I don't do that today. Now, I work 4 days a week. I do think 4 days a week is a healthier lifestyle in dentistry because it is hard what we do. I don't know if I've said that in recent podcasts, but it seems appropriate to say right now. And that is that you chose a very hard profession. I'm one of many, many examples that have taken this profession and maximized my productivity. So now I have it sandwiched into 4 days a week. For goodness sakes, I'm done at 4:30. I don't start until 9 in the morning because I'm not that guy who can start practicing at 6 a.m. And so I'm there from 9 to 4:30. I'm not really seeing that many patients per day because I, as you know, subscribe to a oral sedation mostly practice. So it's a pretty good gig at this point. And I've done this level that I just described for you certainly for the last third of my career. And I certainly didn't work all those hours and some Saturdays and whatever, but for 5 to 6 years in the beginning. So I don't, it's just me. Like I just said, I don't think it's that great of a sacrifice for the end goal if you're listening as to where this could go. it isn't an easy profession, but it's very doable at a very high level. And the one thing is that it's easier than ever to separate yourself from the mass of other dentists because for whatever reason, there's shifts, I believe, in different industries. There was a shift in medicine 25 years ago, and a lot of physicians didn't want to hang around and didn't want to pay the amazing malpractices they had to pay and actually got out. And the analogy is there aren't as many dentists today with the model that I'm giving you during these podcasts of basically, and I said basically, a fee-for-service practice. Most guys have either given in, and now they just have the toxic insurance practice, and they're trying to recover based on volume, more patients, etc. That is not what I'm advocating. Other doctors have sold to corporations and let them handle the mess themselves that's going on today. And some of them were fortunate, other doctors were fortunate to just retire, and they were close enough to that point in their careers. So there's not as many, there's not even nearly the competition, at least in my part of the country, of a practice that's fee for service. Mostly. I take 4 dental plans in my practice. I have about 6,000 patients. They're not all active, but the majority of those patients are. So let's talk about, besides working a lot, what can you do to expand the base of your practice? And that would be, number one, you always have to market, but you have to market intelligently. So let's talk about that for a second. I've spent, your host today, has spent tens of thousands of dollars on programs that went nowhere. For example, I spent $22,000 5 years ago when I experimented with offices in Philadelphia, which would have been my 3rd office. I spent $22,000 on ESPN, thinking I could appeal to the listeners, and it was a very popular station in the Philadelphia area, and it failed miserably. I got 1 patient out of it. And I don't even know if they accepted work. I mean, I literally got 1 patient. I once spent over $50,000 on television in, there's not ABC, NBC, CBS stations, but the ancillary stations. And I got 0 from that. So obviously television does work. We all see Clear Choice ads and other ads. And I believe personally it's television and big radio advertising is for really big, deep-pocketed organizations. And I am a solo practitioner, basically, with 2 offices. So that's, I have an associate, in other words. So that's not going to work for me. So what did I do? Well, I market in newspapers that are pretty much giveaways for the people in the community. Now, they're not free to me, but they're very affordable. I can take out a 1/4 page, even a 1/2 page ad in the local free papers. I even found a radio station in a suburb of a major city. The major city was Philadelphia. And that is affordable. So what do I mean by affordable? Well, it's $900. I want to give you specific examples. It's $900 for 4 times a day, 5 days a week. I'm on exactly 10 minutes before the hour. Like, I don't know if I could negotiate these type of deals. And in fact, I know I couldn't with a big market radio station. But with a smaller station, particularly in the genre, in the area that I'm from, my particular genre of this station is oldies. And so I'm on 10 minutes before the hour every day, 10 of 6, 10 of 7, 10 of 8, 10 of 9. And I sponsor the weather. And the ad is very informal. It's 1 minute of me talking like I'm talking to you right now. I change it about every 3 months. I mean, I want you to picture in your head, this is pretty unsophisticated. The radio representative comes to my office with an old-fashioned tape recorder and an old-fashioned mic and says, okay, here you go. And I record a new commercial. But more importantly for you, like if you're going to advertise to enlarge, to attract new patients, what do you talk about today? You talk about are your credentialing as a cosmetic dentist? Or do you talk about the amazing, quick root canals you do with rotary instruments today? Of course not. What I'd recommend you do is talk about trust and confidence in you. And be an old, what's the word? A good old boy, down country boy or something. I think that works for me. I'll gladly, if any of you write to me, I will have Beth email you one of my commercials, so you'll get a pretty good flavor. And basically it is, hey, today, this is Dr. Steve Rasner on 92 First, and today I want to talk about trust and confidence. Like, how do you know if you can trust your doctor? Because you don't want somebody overzealous, but you also don't want doctor neglect or something like that. And, you know, I talk in a very regular voice like I'm talking to you right now. And so, anyway, I got a little bit off the track, like surprise, surprise to you guys. But you have to market, and you have to market from the beginning. It's the cost of doing business. By the way, in the beginning, you can let people know about your hours because that does separate you from the other dentist if you're there at evenings or a Saturday or whatever you're willing to do. I'm not going to make any hesitation with this. I'm going to tell you, I hated working Saturdays because the better the weather was, the worse of the day I had because people would not show. But all my philosophies and protocols were not in place yet. So I wasn't getting paid up front in the beginning. So it was easier for people to break appointments, which is one of the reasons I advocate to you that you get paid up front. So another thing I'm going to tell you right from the beginning I would do that I did not do, and that's the dreaded recall of patients over 6 months due. So every practice listening today has the same problem. No one in your office will admit or say that they don't reschedule patients that break the appointments, but we all end up with this number of patients that were our patients, but now they're overdue. They didn't come in for the last 6-month recall. And it's a big problem. And the longer you wait, in other words, if you wait over 12 months to try to get those patients back in, it becomes much harder. Now, some of them are going to leave you, and that's why they're not coming back. But you don't know that. So you have to have a firm, established... Let me tell you something. When you're doing these podcasts, listening to my podcast, either take your phone and text yourself on ideas that you want to review with your own team at your next meeting. I hope you're having a meeting at least once a month. And if I was in charge for a short time, I would have you have a meeting every 2 weeks because that's an easier way to get things done. But when you're talking... When we're talking, I'm acting like I'm talking to you right now because that is what I want you to feel. Text yourself and write down certain things that I'm telling you. Like, in the beginning of your career, if you are working nights or doing things like that, I don't do that. So that means I'm not in that market for that patient who has to come, who doesn't want to take his kids out of school. I totally understand that, or has to come on a Saturday or whatever it is. Yes, I would market that, but I can't because it's not my practice. But back to the recall comments for a minute. So we all lose these patients, and you have to have a viable method to get them back. You can't just call them randomly when you're thinking about it. So there's a lot of ways to get your staff to do this. If you want to know the truth, I bribe mine. In other words, my team knows, and I have 18 team members. I only have like 3 that will ever care about doing what I'm about to tell you to do. But they will call up patients. They'll take an hour out of their week, specifically after work, or I'm not sure when they do it. And they'll call up patients that are 6 months over 6 months overdue. So the patient did not come in for their 6-month recall. And they'll call patients like that. And if you do that, do not say you're overdue for your cleaning. That's a bad thing to say. You have to make it personal. You have to know a little bit if they had any work done last time. So it requires a little chart review, looking at the chart before you make the call. Maybe you did an implant. Maybe you did one root canal. Wouldn't it be better to call that patient and say, hey, I'm Jamie from Dr. Rasner's office, and it's my job to make sure patients stay current with their 6-month checkups in our office, or health reviews, whatever fancy term you want to use. And I'm calling you because I know that you're about 2 months overdue. And I also want to know, how did you do with the root canal that Dr. such and such did on the upper right? Is that comfortable for you? And listen, when you do this stuff, you are going to get your feelings hurt. People will leave you. It doesn't matter. You have to do it because that keeps the nucleus big. And you just, look, there are patients that you'll call that the only reason that they didn't come in is because they forgot. And it's not a priority to them right now. And all they needed was a call from you. There's also people that, even though it may be covered by their insurance, or don't want to invest in anything, and they know they have to invest in their mouth. So that's the reason they're not coming in right now. And they're not going to come in, and they may say, well, call me back 6 months later. And what you do with that patient is, can I at least make you an appointment in the book? If you can't make it, you can't make it. We'll call you the week before, and you keep them in the system. That's what you do if there's no other way to get them to actually come in right now. Okay. So far I've told you, you build the nucleus by constantly marketing. And I know there's dentists listening right now that don't market or don't have to market. All I will say to you is this. I know doctors like that. I've been doing this 39 years. And I also know doctors that did that. I can remember the conversations for 22 years and came up to me at a presentation and said, Doc, I didn't market for 22 years. And then my practice hit the wall last year or 3 years ago. Because it can happen to you. You can't ever assume that if you're experiencing great success right now, there's no guarantee that it's going to stay that way. And that's just like taking care of your body, and you're healthy. Well, you continue to do that. Because these core practice protocols I'm giving you are never going to get old. So I guess the real question is how much should you invest in your marketing and things specific like this? And I can't cover everything in the 30 minutes a week we do this. So you will have to write to me for that. And I could give you specific advice. Another thing I want to say in this podcast about enlarging, there's two more things. This is really critical. And one is you have a better chance of patients staying with you, if you have a relationship-based practice. And really all that fancy term means is everybody knows their name, and your people do know your patients' names and things about your patients, and want to know things about your patients. You know, I see it in action in my practice every week. The front desk team, the clinical team. And by the way, your team only is going to know what's important to you as the boss if you constantly remind them. So I'm talking to you today on a Sunday. You know, tomorrow morning I'm going to tell you, when I go into the office, Mondays I go in a little bit earlier, and I spend that time reminding the team of what's important to me. And one of them is going to be that it's a relationship-based practice. That's one of the things that separates us from other practices, that the patients walk in and they feel like everybody knows them and cares about them. And the truth is we do. And your team might too, but if you don't have that as a characteristic of your practice that you want your staff to convey, then maybe they don't do it enough. And it could be anything, and it has to be natural. A recent baby added to their family, or a grandbaby, a vacation, for goodness sakes, a surgery that somebody in their family just had. Certainly knowing their name, or being able to say, how's Mr. Smith, or whatever his name be. I'm not very good at this stuff, personally. But I can get away with that because I have a team that's very engaged with the practice. This may not sound like a lot to you. It's very much, it's the opposite of what's happening in a lot of corporations and in a lot of dentistry. I do ask patients when they come in, when I know they've left another dentist recently, a practice, and I'll say, so what made you come to our practice? Or what made you, or what made you leave the other practice? And they might say, and listen, if this is, I wouldn't have an answer to how to fix this if I was a corporation. They say, well, we never get the same dentist. And to me, dentistry is a personal thing. And I mean, the new doctor doesn't even know me, no, not any more than the first doctor I had there for the last year. And so, yeah, not let alone the team members at the front desk or clinic members. So, yeah, I think a relationship-based practice is exactly what it says. I see my team exchanging books, CDs, other things with patients, and I just smile because I know that part of my practice is safe and protected. Another thing along the relationship-based practice is having somebody in the office remind you every day to do one thing as the boss, as the doctor, for a patient that's got nothing to do with anything except relationship building. So that may be you sending a card. So I would never remember this. So I have my office manager every day, and she knows that it is important to me that she remind me. There'll be a card on my desk. I'm not kidding. It may be a card for a celebration of in that family's life of something. I didn't pick the card out. I didn't even know there was such an event. But I sign it. I know who the patient is when she reminds me. And sometimes, of course, I just know who the patient is. Sometimes it's a phone call by me, maybe to an older patient who, and I got to tell you, it's a lovely way to spend 5 minutes of your day. It's a nice thing to do. It feels unbelievably rewarding and refreshing when you do things that really have nothing to do with you. I'm not talking about a patient that's thinking about having a $20,000 investment in their mouth. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about simply doing nice things each day for the people that chose to come to our practice. So listen, 4 times a week is 16 times a month, times 12 months a year. I'm reaching a lot of people, and I do that every year for many, many years, and it's not a lot of work by me. The next thing I'm going to bring up in the next podcast is about building the nucleus, and this is critical stuff, so be sure to tune into the next one. I'll call these part 1 and part 2. I'm not sure of the name yet, but we'll make sure you know this is a podcast, when a podcast has 2 parts. This one is going to take the length of the whole podcast because it's about how do you maintain the balance of being a good doctor when you're presenting case recommendations to patients, treatment recommendations. How do you maintain the base and being okay with skipping? I said this earlier in the podcast. Be okay putting certain things on the back burner because there's certain things you have to do that there is no compromise for me. So for example, soft tissue care is not a compromising point of view for me when I'm recommending treatment to a patient. Okay, they don't have to have the crown yet, I guess. That's their choice. They certainly don't have to have teeth replacement everywhere. But if they're going to come to me and they have teeth, I'm pretty strict about soft tissue care for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is what you're supposed to do, because it's the gateway to the rest of their oral and physical health, in my opinion. So if they need quadrant scale and root planing and they need to be on a 3-month or 4-month recall, that's not a place I compromise. There's no compromise to that. So they can have a denture without implants, right? Well, you can't have me overlooking the fact that, sometimes Michelle will come to me and she'll say, my new patient coordinator, she'll say, can this patient just have a gingivitis scaling? We all know what that is. And no, I wouldn't have recommended quadrant scaling and 3 to 4 month. And a 3 to 4 month recall is not a, oh, by the way, it's a very big part of it. I don't even want them to go through a scale and root planing if they won't do that. And if you speak with that passion about the importance of soft tissue health as a gateway to the rest of their health, and have, which I'll send to you, by the way, if you ask me, if you have current documentation on that relationship between systemic problems and active periodontal disease, if you talk with the passion that you should speak with, because it's true, I don't have many people denying that. So one more thing, I want to start including clinical tips. And eventually I will speak about the clinical protocols I use if I think they can be transmitted, without you seeing me, because I think a lot of you are just listening. So the clinical tip for this week is for you to look up, and he doesn't know I'm doing this, Dr. Bill Strupp and Michael Brum, Brumm, in Clearwater, Florida. They give a 2-day, only in February of each year, a course on restorative dentistry, on their protocols for bonding, for cementing, for core buildups, for occlusion their way. And it's not a gigantic investment for you if you're here in the United States. But I'm going to give you a tip each podcast, and this one is the Dr. Bill Strupp and Michael Brum in Clearwater, Florida. Again, you have to Google them. I don't even have their number handy. They give a real nice course in February each year, 2 days. Anyway, I hope this one's been helpful to all of you. I'm Dr. Steve Rasner, and I'll see you on part 2 of this podcast next week. Thanks.